And we'll now hand over the opportunity to Professor John Volmink to share with us some of the lessons from the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. Over to you, Prof. John, all the way from South Africa.
Thank you. Thank you, Moses. It's very good to be here. It's a great honor for me to be with you today, to participate in this very significant event, now the ninth anniversary of the passing of a great leader, Nelson Mandela. It is really exciting to see the many Ubuntu young leaders from around the world. And I can see you from around the world because some of you look like winter, some of you look like summer. But we are in different seasons, but we're one in heart. And we all gathered to pay homage to a great leader. And collectively, as well as individually, remind ourselves of his legacy and what we have learned from him. But before I go on, I just want to pay tribute to the president of IPAF, who's just spoken. Rui and I come along many years, and I've never failed to admire and be inspired by his leadership. Together with his team, Monica and Moses, and I see Queen and lots of other people. It's so good to see that the team hasn't lost their vision and their passion. So we are here to remind ourselves of the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Now, before I do that, I want to say that the world at this time is hungry for good leaders. And there seems to be an abundance of poor leaders, even corrupt leaders. And that is why the world is in the state that it's in, because of poor leadership. Now, the author, you will probably have read the book, The Tale of Two Cities. The author is Charles Dickens, who in the 1850s wrote as follows: "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness. It was a spring of hope, but it was a winter of despair." And I want to say, though that was written in the 1850s, much is true of the world today. And sometimes the balance, there's more darkness than light. There's more foolishness than wisdom. And there's more despair than hope. That's the world that we find ourselves in today. But we have opportunities. We have opportunities to learn. And today is one of those, as we reflect on the leadership of Nelson Mandela. I have a very good friend and a very respected author here in South Africa called Ruel Khoza. He's now come out with a new book, but in his first book, he said, we all know, he said about Mandela, we all know that the greatest leader of this era lives in our country, yet he has written no book on leadership specifically, nor has he developed a manual on leadership, because he is that book. You have to get to learn him to understand what he's about. And so, in other words, if we wish to learn from the legacy of Nelson Mandela, we have to get to see the world through his eyes and to see each other through his eyes. And I feel privileged that since he was released from prison in 1990, until he passed away in 2013, today, 9 years ago, I was living in the same country and had an opportunity to take a close look at the way he led as a servant leader. And my wife and I had the privilege of spending time with him at times. So what are the lessons on leadership that I learned? And one of them, Rui had already picked on. And I agree. It is probably the most important contribution that Nelson Mandela gave the world. Nelson Mandela taught me that leaders must create hope. And Rui said that. Nelson Mandela gave the whole world hope in a dream. And that dream is so unattainable. And the dream is that we can overcome our prejudices and overcome our hate and embrace the power found in one community, one country, and indeed in one global human family. That's the dream. And some people have given up on that dream. Some people have never believed in that dream. But hope is not just about expectation. It is about confidently expecting things to get better. Hope is a belief that things can get better, but confidently so. And with a leader like Nelson Mandela, he gave us a confidence. Leaders must find ways to make people more confident to face the future into which they are being hurtled. And I can think of no worse place that Madiba could have stepped into out of prison, when he came out of prison, than here in South Africa. There was so much hate, there was so much division, there was so much chaos, and he stepped into that world. And in the spirit of Ubuntu, he said, for me to be free is not merely to cast off my chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. That's the basis of servant leadership. You don't think about your own success. You think about not only your own success, but the well-being of others. So Nelson Mandela made me realize that the sense of community is absolutely essential, and particularly in a society such as ours in South Africa. And I don't have time to expand. Let me hasten on to the second one. He taught me that good leaders do not divide. They do not divide. They bring people together. Nelson Mandela swept away the conventional signposts which were leading us to greater injustice and greater pain. And he gave us new hope of a future country. He put new signposts there. A new country that belongs to all its people. And this is the country where I'm sitting in now, right now. And we have a long way to go here in South Africa, a very long way to go to reach that future. But he has set us new signposts. That is a vision the world needs to grasp now more than ever, as we face the chronic challenges born by deep injustices and violence and poverty and hunger and wars, that they all call to urgent and united action. And so the third point, Nelson Mandela was an activist. He wasn't a theoretician. He didn't sit in a comfort chair and come up with nice ideas. Nelson Mandela taught me that leaders are people of action. But Ubuntu helps us to understand that the basic moral reason for action is not to break down things. It should always be for the greater good, the greater good. That is what real activism is about. It's not about destroying things. In other words, action is seen as a desire. It's only desirable if it helps to develop community and reduces discord and produces harmony. So Ubuntu acknowledges that individuality, not in the service of oneself, but in the service of others and the community. That's an activist. And two more. Nelson Mandela was a bridge builder. And Rui spoke about that. And he taught me that good leaders are bridge builders. In 1990, when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison on his own terms, I completed my own understanding of who this incredible man is, bringing people together. He stepped out of prison into a divided society, as I've said, filled with conflict and hate and injustice. And he immediately began to lay the foundation of a bridge of healing from a broken past to a new and dynamic future. And he led us away from hate and fear. So lastly, the last lesson, Nelson Mandela convinced me that we cannot overcome hate through hate, but we need empathy. He said, and I quote, "As I walked out of the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness and my hatred behind, I would still be in prison." So against expectation, and despite all the hardship and pain and adversity he and his family experienced during his years in prison, Nelson Mandela continued to believe, and I quote again, "No one is born hating. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, because love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." And so, as I close, I quote again Nelson Mandela writing in the book by Ruel Koza. He said, and this is a challenge to all of us, this is about legacy. This is about what we leave behind. He said, "Throughout the ages and in all countries, men and women have come and gone. Some leave nothing behind, not even their name. It is as if they never lived. Nobody hears about them again. Others do leave something behind. And that is the haunting memory of the evil deeds that they have committed against their fellow human beings. Every time their names are mentioned," says Nelson Mandela, "feelings of revulsion well up in our hearts. But still others," and here I would like to challenge us all, including myself, what are we going to leave behind? Still others, he says, do leave something behind. And that is the good that they did to improve the lives of all people. And may we as Ubuntu leaders never give up on that vision, and let us pursue that legacy with passion. And I spoke at my brother's funeral last week, and I asked, what is the legacy? What is the legacy? He had a beautiful legacy, my brother. What is the legacy that I will leave behind? And so I want to thank you all for listening, and for all the Ubuntu leaders. I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say in the next half an hour. All the best.